I think today we're talking about the State of the Nation address that was delivered by President Zuma Thursday last week. It's an annual gathering in the line of a lot of discussions that takes place, both party politically and parliamentary. We have typically the year begins with the January of the 8th statement by the ruling party. That is like a political vision of the year. And then we get the State of the Nation address. And on the back of the State of the Nation address, we've got the budget in basically 2 weeks after that. State of the Nation is linked in the budget in some way because what the president here sees as his vision, Pravin Gordhan must get the money to fund what he's seeing, broadly speaking. State of the Nation also is something where a politician and a state president can use very effectively to harness resources, to get people interested in what he's doing, and to just create a climate for things to happen. Obama is very successful currently in his state of the, I think he presents a very good State of the Nation.
Well, I think this is important because it's called the State of the Nation because it's addressed to the nation. But of course, different stakeholders, business, labor, and the man in the street will react to it, will respond to it, and that will determine how successful that speech is in mobilizing the country behind a particular vision.
That's right. And it's also the opening of Parliament, and it is kind of agenda setting for the parliamentary program for the year, the government's program for the year. And in that sense, I listened to the speech on Thursday evening, and two things struck me. Firstly, I know the president was ill, he had flu, but there was very little energy in his presentation. There was very little enthusiasm in his presentation. And secondly, to me, it sounded like a rehashing of things in the past. You can be very creative in speeches like that. I just thought a missed opportunity.
Yes, well, I think that may be the point of departure also when one speaks to a lot of business people whose eyes were very much on the speech because of what had happened in Mangaung and the acceptance of the National Development Plan. So I think there were expectations that the rhetoric would be strong in the speech to really reinforce the traction of the National Development Plan. And I think there was disappointment that there was an opportunity lost because the NDP will need as much traction as it can be given. It's not on automatic pilot. And the feeling was, when you reflected on the speech, which lasted for approximately 70 minutes, about 4 minutes were in fact devoted to the NDP. One wonders whether the 4 minutes were written by perhaps Minister Manuel and the rest by perhaps Minister Patel. I've heard a cynical remark along those lines. So to some extent, the message of the NDP was blunted and didn't. I think the speech didn't really, while it didn't do any harm in the sense that certain boxes could be ticked, it was far too microeconomic for a speech of that nature. I think it really needed to use that platform to throw further weight behind the NDP and say to the nation, this is where I want the country to be by 2030. I want you to all be part of it, and even borrow some of the rhetoric out of the National Development Plan to indeed serve that purpose. I think in that sense, there's been a disappointment. I think also, one might say there were other events which also somewhat overshadowed what he was saying, but even still, I think if the message had been strong enough, it would have made more of an impact.
Especially if you think about 2 or 3 threats to the NDP as it stands at the moment. I think the whole development in the farming sector, I think the lack of a proper development in our education sector, and I think things like service delivery issues, which I'll get to on later, those things are currently threatening the NDP, and I think he could have paid more attention to those things.
Yes, exactly. You see, although it's been off to a good start, with Mangaung and so forth, and it's become a part of the public debate, although not to the extent that one would like. The fact remains that already there's some slippage. If you look at the infrastructural bill, which he mentioned, from a business point of view, some of the contents of that bill, although the sort of intention is laudable to speed up the whole development of our infrastructure, are quite horrendous from the point of view.
Yeah, and I found his remarks on the big guys in the construction was out of line in terms of a State of the Nation address.
Yes.
If you want to build a Gautrain, if you want to build a big dam, there are only 5 or 6 companies in South Africa that can do that. That is as simple as it is.
I think also what was also missing was we thought that there now was a commitment to a youth wage subsidy.
Yeah, that's a political one. Really.
That was conspicuous by its absence, which suggested a U-turn somewhere in the background.
But somewhere he indicated that NECLAC will do that for you.
No, I can tell you with some assurance that the package that is on the table at NECLAC may be useful. But as it stands at the moment, it excludes a youth wage subsidy. So that battle is not over. I don't think the battle is over between the Minister of Finance, who proposed it originally, and some of his colleagues. And I think business is going to engage on that part of the youth employment package, because it feels that that is quite an important part, whatever else might come out of NECLAC in regard to the youth unemployment.
Maybe we must flag this one and listen in a week or two with the budget what Praveen is going to say about it, maybe under a different name. Because you see, what killed the youth subsidy, kind of, was the fact that the DA embraced it as soon as it was announced. And it seems to me that made it very difficult for the ANC to deal with. Another political issue that I think the President did in a very funny way was the issue on service delivery boycotts. He said that there will be stronger action. He will not allow any of these violent actions anymore, but he never addressed the root cause of why those things emerge. The root cause why these things emerge is poor management at the third level of government, weak administration, an incapable state. Remember, the National Development Plan talks about a capable state. Incapable state at certain levels, and that causes this. Now he wants to deal with the symptoms, and that is throwing water on the fire, but he should actually deal with where the fire emerges. And that to me was totally absent in his discussion.
But Theo, I think one of the important things that the business community and investors have been looking for some time has been a higher degree of certainty and predictability in our policy framework. And since Mangaung, there's been a positive response that maybe that message had been taken on board, and that now it would be embodied in the National Development Plan, that steadily our policies will be aligned over time with the National Development Plan. Now that message is clearly going to take a lot more time to sink in where it matters. I'm coming back to the wage subsidy.
Okay.
You can't say to business at Mangaung, we've agreed we're going to have a wage subsidy for youth. You then have an NEC meeting and you reiterate it. You say, we have decided definitely we're going ahead.
That's what Gwede Montash is saying.
Exactly.
Explicitly.
And it is, in fact, one of the specific points in the National Development Plan that we should go down that road as part of the package. Then you come in the State of the Nation and you deliberately leave it out, and you create the impression that somewhere in the back rooms, the legs have been cut off that proposal. This is precisely an example, one of several, of what makes it difficult for some investors to commit themselves to this country. Because they say, today you say this, then tomorrow someone gets at you, the day after, we're in a different situation. In fact, what often happens is that it's the uncertainty that corrodes investor confidence. Not a weak policy. A weak policy you can adjust to. At least you know it's in a certain direction, and you can take your business decisions. But uncertainty or U-turns, the cumulative effect of that is a big contributor to our really poor economic
strategies and financial planning needs predictability, and the government.
Exactly.
The only thing that he was on message that came from Mangaung was nationalization.
Absolutely.
He was categoric in saying that we've put this argument to bed. That, I think those were the words to that extent. So, but that also creates a subtext, and that is, they may put that to bed, but now they're talking about a super tax of mining, and they're talking about this and that. So there may be no nationalization, But that doesn't mean they're not going to try other things.
You may die the death of 1,000 interventions without being nationalized. But I think the one point, I know some people have interpreted very negatively, but I think one must accept that if there's an announcement that since we had the CATS Commission into the tax system
years ago,
15 or 16 years ago, things have changed quite a lot. And although you may say, yes, this is a hungry treasury looking for more sources of revenue, the fact is that once you have a proper investigation, all options of how you finance the National Development Plan are on the table. And that includes infrastructure, where all the homework hasn't been done. And as good as the National Development Plan is, there's still some gaps. One of them is, of course, how are you going to finance this?
But
that's why I think it's important that they haven't gone ahead and just announced new taxes and said, well, this is what we have decided to do. They realize that our tax base is small, that we're putting a great strain on our tax system, that we need to take it under review, and it must be part of the alignment with the NDP now. And I think if provided that's done in a professional and a balanced way, I think then we must be prepared to support that investigation.
And I think it's very important, because if we just run down a few statistics, we're a country of about 52 million people, of which 17 million currently receives grants of some form or another from the state. 11 million individuals and companies are paying VAT, sales tax. 6 million approximately people pay tax, and 11 million people are employed. Those are roughly the figures.
Those are realities, and you need to adapt your fiscal options to those realities. And of course, ultimately, you see, the loop closes, because if you can get more growth, you get more taxpayers. So that's where the NDP is very interdependent. You can't only deal with part of it. The fact is that if we were growing more rapidly, we wouldn't have some of these acute choices. Now the question is, can we implement the NDP in such a way as to get this economy onto a higher growth path? Not without pain, but not with the maximum pain. But then you need to take some tough choices, and you need to give leadership, and you need to also bring in the private sector in a way. I mean, not only the private sector, but clearly, if you want the jobs created, you're going to have to mobilize the private sector on a much stronger basis than now. And you must create a framework of incentives that will change people's behavior in a more positive way. And I think those all spin off from the NDP. The question is, it's a little worrying when already in the first month or two, there are points of slippage where certain of the nettles are not being grasped, even though the president is in a stronger political position than he's ever been. So now you're asking yourself, is it like a sandwich between Mangaung and the election, and we are the meat in the sandwich? In other words, to what extent will the momentum of Mangaung and the NDP be modified by the need to do well in next year's election? And that a lot depends on whether you're taking a short-term view or a long-term view. And the NDP is trying to get us out, both the private sector and the government, out of a short-term horizon and into a long-term set of decisions which will make this country, make our economy bigger, stronger, and indeed better.
I listened to Zuma at least 4 times since Mangaung. I was at Mangaung. His speech as chairman or president of the party was more like a State of the Nation address on the 16th, 17th of December. It was energetic. It was in front of his own people. And at that point, I said, is this the address of a president of a party or the president of a country? Because I thought he would, at that stage, speak towards the party and not towards the country. But of course, there's a larger audience listening. So he did that, and that was not a bad speech. Too long also.
But I thought, actually, like you, I thought he did a better job on the NDP then than he did.
Absolutely, that's what I wanted to say.
Last week.
Yeah, the parliamentary speech, probably because it was done by bureaucrats in the presidency. We know that Zuma, different from Mbeki, his predecessor. For Mbeki, this was like an intellectual challenge that he had to deal with, and his speeches was presented in a very eloquent way. Zuma is not an intellectual. So you can't expect that kind of speech from him. And I don't think he added a single word to the speech. It was given to him.
But I'm sure he has the skills of being very persuasive. I know.
But not on paper.
But then he needs to get speech writers who will mobilize that talent of his and put the bullets into his gun so that he can fire them in an effective way. And I think that's why
the bullets in the gun is like a Freudian slip in terms of other issues in the country at the moment.
Well, perhaps.
But I agree with you.
Metaphorically.
I agree with you. It tells us that not only business people but politicians as well need to take some guidance and need to take some advice in terms of their own presentation, how they can enhance their own message and those kind of things. And I don't think Zuma is doing well at the moment.
See, the important point, having sat through some very important and useful meetings with President Zuma in the last few months, there's no doubt he personally wishes to engage and mobilize the private sector at a high level, obviously. But all this needs to be translated into practicalities, like the NDP, at another level. And the big challenge, whether it's the budget in 2 weeks' time, or indeed some of the ministerial votes that are going to come up, which need to be scrutinized, other important of the platforms, that the message of the NDP needs to be constantly reiterated, and we need to test whether the whole cabinet is marching now, increasingly marching to the NDP tune.
Yeah.
And that's the big test. And I think what's important now is implementation, implementation, implementation. He himself has said that. The thing is to develop the tools and to forge the cooperation you need to make it happen. And that means that some sacred ideological chivalrous may have to be abandoned.
Yeah.
And you may have to, like on the youth wage subsidy, talk to your big allies and say, look, we simply have to move down.
Make this breakthrough. From this State of the Nation address, the following process will now filter through. We will now hear 9 State of the Province addresses in the next 2 weeks, up to the budget, where premiers will basically echo what the president said. I've got the opportunity to go to the opening of the legislature in Mahikeng. I will probably hear a similar speech focused on the province, and then after that, of course, the budget, and then similar provincial budgets, and so the year kicks off politically and economically.
Well, I think this is important because actually, from an economic point of view, but from other points of view, it's clear that if one looks at the state of the nation, there's a lot of repair work to be done. There's a lot of transformation to be undertaken. There's much more certainty and predictability to be given. We really, if we look just ahead to the budget, we look at the numbers, the short-term numbers and the longer-term numbers as far as public finances are concerned, the financing of what we want to do, trying to boost investor confidence. We cannot afford another rating downgrade.
No, we can't. I agree.
That would impose a great cost on government and on our ability to implement the NDP in the way we would like. Although we don't think that there's yet been enough traction around the NDP, it almost, you might say, without being melodramatic, for the time being is probably our last opportunity to mobilize the nation. Given all the tensions below the surface, here's an opportunity. So whether it's at the provincial level or the local level, in business or in labor, I think one must, as far as possible, try to forge the new compromises you need. Because the one ism that I think is important with the NDP is not capitalism, socialism, globalism, all these buzzwords that people like to argue about. It's pragmatism. That's what embodies the NDP. Now, we can't rally behind that. And as we implement, sure, we'll have some differences, but we must say we have a goal. We have a 2030 goal, which is a promissory note for the people of the country. Now, we have to make sure that we can pay that note when it falls due, but we've got to start now. The fact that it's long-term doesn't mean that we've got endless time. We must start now, and we must ensure that we put aside our differences as far as possible, but that we throw our weight behind the vision for 2030, because I don't know how much longer important sections of the population out there are going to be patient.
Yeah.
When more plans come and go, more State of the Nation speeches, business speeches, labor speeches, all good sounding, but not translating into differences on the ground where it matters. And I think that's the important message of the NDP, and really we must not lose this opportunity to make sure that it will be implemented, that we will win the cooperation we want, and that we will have a stronger, better, and bigger economy to do the things that out there we are expected to do for the less privileged in South Africa.
Well, in conclusion, I would say that I agree fully with what you've just said, and I think you also made an extremely important point of how important this State of the Nation is relative to where we're going, because in 2014 we've got a national election, and it is not difficult to already predict that that State of the Nation and that budget will be very much focused on the election coming, which is a short-term thing. This is a strategically important time for us to get the word that you use so well, traction, into those processes, because next year, the first 4 months, will be a silly season in South Africa.
Absolutely. And the one thing to which one can hold on to in the middle of the silly season is to look at the longer term and say, we're still committed to the NDP. So once the silly season is over, we will resume our longer term strategy with hopefully as little harm done in the short term as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.